This episode of the Vincast is proudly brought to you in part by Different Drop, online wine retailers that exclusively work with Australian producers who are usually making wines in very small volumes using some innovative and often sustainable practices. Now, if you're a fan of the Intrepid Wino channel on YouTube, you might have seen some of my Let's Taste or Let's Taste Live videos. And usually a lot of the wines that I actually taste on that channel, you can actually buy from Different Drop. And even better, when you see the Let's Taste Live videos, they've actually been sourced from Different Drop. So I worked with the guys to put together an interesting kind of pack. And usually, some of the time they've from previous guests of the podcast and hopefully some future guests of the podcast, including today's guest. So I do suggest going to differentdrop.com/intrepidwino to secure some of those amazing wines because they don't really last for very long, of course, because they're made in very small volumes. And make sure that when you do go to purchase, that you put in the code IntrepidWino, and the guys from Different Drop will give you a 10% discount. Very generous of them as a support of the podcast and a support for those fantastic Australian wines. On this episode of the Vincast, I chat with Alex Head, one of the most exciting and game-changing winemakers based in the Barossa, producing exceptional wines from Rhone varieties. Hello, Vincasters. Welcome to another episode of the Vincast. My name is James Garsbrook, otherwise known as the Intrepid Wino, and thank you for being with me for another episode. I hope you enjoyed the last episode with Dan Buckle. It was fascinating to chat with him, and I look forward to trying some Chandon wines. It's actually been a little while since I've had some Chandon wines, so if you're a lover of bubbles as I am, then you should definitely try some of the special cuvées that he's been making. But I'm excited about this week's guest. But before I talk about this week's guest, you might have seen the first Let's Taste Live episode I did, which was on Australian Grenache. And in fact, one of the wines on that tasting is from this week's guest. So I've got another one of its type coming up actually on the 28th of September, 6:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, looking at 6 different Australian Riesling wines in this case. I've worked with the guys from Different Drop to get 6 wines from different regions and different producers. So it's going to be really interesting to look at those Riesling wines and with a special guest, a sommelier friend of mine. So if you want to take part in this fantastic tasting, I do suggest going to the Intrepid Wino channel on YouTube, and you'll find under events a way to actually set a reminder to actually tune in live, and that way you can actually interact with us as we're tasting, ask questions, make comments. It's going to be fantastic, but don't worry, if you can't make it live, then you'll still be able to see the video on the Intrepid Wino channel afterwards. So I hope you will actually join us, and thanks obviously to Different Drop for working with us to put together such a fascinating tasting. So my guest for this episode is Alex Head. Alex kind of came across my radar several years ago when I was the wine buyer King and Godfrey. I was really impressed with the quality of his wines out of the Barossa, particularly those from Rhone varieties. And he has gone from strength to strength, has really established a great reputation for himself for his wine. So I was really excited when he was over in Melbourne recently to sit down with him for a good chat about his background. And he had quite an interesting journey. So I hope you enjoy this episode. Please stick around to the end of the episode so you can find out how to get in contact with Alex and myself. But until then, I will see you on the other side. Alex, thank you very much for joining me here in the Vincast studio.
My pleasure, James.
So I start every episode, as my listeners would know, asking my guest if they remember what the first interaction with wine was that actually kind of set them on the path of wanting to make wine their career. But let's face it, their life really.
The first interaction with wine was my father's a priest, and he's used to serve a bit of port wine on Sundays. So it was definitely the first time I ever wine graced my lips. But
I like it.
Yeah, I certainly didn't think about it as my enlightening light bulb moment. It was, but that was definitely the first. But I guess
So you would have a bit of wine even when you were young?
Sneak a bit. Dad used to sneak a bit always after the
sacrament,
the leftover.
Yeah. Okay.
I definitely think the first experience of drinking wine and thinking, hey, I enjoy imbibing the good stuff was in college. I was introduced to the wine cellar club at college, and we all had accounts, so wine was free essentially, until you had to pay for it. And I just enjoyed.
It was free until you had to pay for it.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Well, when you're
so it was like a wine
when you're
on
a college
wine on
student
credit,
and you've got no money.
Oh, so it was like a HEX loan.
Yeah, essentially on wine. So that allowed me to drink wine way beyond what I could normally afford.
Where were you studying?
At Sydney University, St Paul's College.
So college, as in you were boarding?
Yeah, it's a place of residence for men and women around the country that they need somewhere to live.
So where are you from originally?
Carlton, born in Carlton.
You're from Melbourne?
Yeah, but obviously a long time ago.
So why Sydney?
Oh, I grew up in Perth.
Right. Okay.
And then lived in Glasgow, and then lived in Perth again, then Hobart for sort of equal amounts of time, and then finally Sydney after finished school.
Right. Okay. So what were you studying in Sydney?
I did a science degree and
in a particular area?
Majored in biochemistry, microbiology, a little bit of marine science.
Yeah. Did you have an idea about what you might want to do as far as a career?
No, and that's why I just wanted to get a basic science degree out of the way. So I knew while I was figuring it out, I just needed a degree, and that would give me the opportunities later on. But the connections...
So you had interest in science?
Yes, very much so. It was about the only thing I was good at.
Right.
And had remote interest in besides sport, wine, food, girls.
Do you think to a certain extent that kind of fed into the wine later on? Do you like the sort of the science of wine?
Definitely the technical side. I like numbers. I've got a good memory for numbers, and maybe it's some form of learning disability or dyslexia, or I've got this weird thing for remembering numbers and technical details. Definitely figured that out at university, I think. Tried to avoid anything to do with English or reading.
Right. You like the kind of the black and white of the numbers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll pick up a technical book and love reading it, but I just can't read fiction. Non-fiction. Fiction, sorry, yeah.
What was it that you kind of liked about wine when you first started getting interested in it?
I liked collecting things, and I liked the way I liked the complexity of wine and I enjoyed just putting things in my mouth. It's a real sort of probably a hangover from childhood, just sucking on anything I could.
Sure.
Yes, food wine was about the most important thing through college in particular. I got involved with a bunch of guys that really loved the food and wine. We started a club called the Tiresians, and we used to meet and read poetry and drink incredible wines at sort of restaurants that we couldn't afford. And
that sounds very Dead Poets Society.
There was a little bit of that, a little bit of midnight meetings with great bottles of wine.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it was a time when I certainly wasn't thinking about careers in the wine industry, but I was sort of fascinated with anything to do with wine. And I suppose if I wind it back to first year, there was a time where we were going to the Marlborough Hotel bottle shop
Yeah.
and trying every week trying a different cask wine, and I got to the point where I could tell you. I started to understand wine through cask wine, and there
Interesting.
were 10 different brands and 5 or 6 different casks per, and I knew how much they cost, the price per standard drink,
Yeah.
the varieties that were in them,
Yeah.
which one was sour, bitter, which one was slightly sweet, and got to the point where I probably started giving people advice on the best cask wine to drink.
Yeah.
So, and that obviously rolled into bottled wine through the college cellar, where I didn't have to pay until I worked summers in the gardens.
So it would literally be like, just put it on my tab.
Yeah, put it on the tab. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So that was great because of that access and sharing as well. Because if you buy a bottle of wine with two friends, the wine instantly becomes 33% of the value. So,
but it also becomes a conversation point.
Yeah.
Rather than having it by yourself and just thinking about it, you can actually discuss it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we were, and the conversations flowed, of course, at college. Not just about wine. I met some really, really deep thinkers, people who were really interested in things beyond food and wine. So it was a great time.
I'm sure. Yeah, like there would have been, particularly in terms of like the Did you feel like you said you talked about sort of having these discussions about poetry, but did you kind of like drink wine and think, oh, this theory, this theorem, or this kind of this particle, or something like that? Like, did you kind of find an inspiration as far as science?
At that stage, I don't think the wine was the cerebral element, or the technical discussion. I think we were just exploring drunken conversation and
talking
just pushing,
shit as it
pushing the topics, and,
right. Okay. So what did you do post university?
I launched pretty much into a massive sort of overseas holiday.
Yeah.
And followed food and wine. That was the main thing that I went to Europe for. Went to a lot of different wine regions, cities, drank as much sort of French franc a bottle wine I could find, particularly in Paris. And I think during that 6 months really decided that when I got back to Sydney, I wouldn't put a lab coat on and do urine assays. And sort of be indoors. I'd really explore the wine industry and the whether or not it was vineyard or retail or wholesale. Yeah.
So the gastronomic kind of journey in Europe, that was sort of where you went, oh, I'd just like to do this as far as a job.
Yeah. I had to go overseas to then figure it out.
Yeah, so, interesting.
I spent 3 years at Sydney Uni. Having no direction,
coming out of it, going,
not sure, not quite sure, and it was the travel that where I figured it out.
So, what was it that you most connected with? What sort of places did you most connect with, as far as sort of food and wine, and I guess sort of did you kind of have did you learn an appreciation for provenance as far as where it was coming from?
Well, obviously, yeah. You look. I just loved going to a place and tasting food and drinking wine and understanding people in that environment.
Yeah.
And looking at the history and why everything had come to that point and why that experience was important to them and who they were.
Yeah.
And definitely.
So coming back. You're right, okay.
So I got back to Sydney.
What can I do?
Yeah, and I started working as a cellarman in a Kirribilli hotel. So just learning about how to clean beer lines essentially and set up a pub and
a cellarman as opposed to a cellar hand.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So a lot of time in a cold cellar and at that stage wine was an interest. And when I worked in the bottle shop, it was spend a third of your salary on bottles of wine each week, and that rolled into a retail position for a wine retailer in Sydney, and into management and running stores, and I ended up at Paddington Fine Wines, which was a little standalone store, which doesn't exist anymore. I think it's turned into a BW.
I'm trying to think, another of my previous guests talked about it.
I think Hugh and Hook used to work there at one point.
Dave Brooks? Did Dave Brooks work there?
Possibly, yeah. Oh, he worked at Ultimo Wines. No, he worked at... I worked with him at Langton's.
Ah, okay. Yeah, rightio.
So, we're all connected, hey? It's a small industry.
And you all end up in the Barossa now.
Yeah. What was I doing then? So
you must have spent a fair few years in that kind of retail
environment. I did.
How did you find that sort of at that period of time? What was the retail market in Sydney for wine?
It was post the initial online selling. Online selling was about to start. So we were all just salesmen selling booze.
Right. We literally just bricks and mortar.
Yeah, talking to people.
Right.
There was no real email campaign marketing.
Yeah.
There was no mailing list stuff.
No.
Yeah, so it was
data collection and
not at all. The only places, and I was yet to work at Ultimo Wine Centre. They were just doing paper offers every quarter. That was about as advanced as it was.
Just snail mail.
Really, letterbox drop kind of stuff. So that was late 90s.
Sure.
And I was very much interested in the Barossa at that stage.
Well, I'm assuming that in those positions you would have had the opportunity to meet, distributors and more importantly producers, and kind of get the opportunity to chat with them and talk with them. See the wine, sort of discuss sort of what you liked, what you kind of connected with.
Yeah, you would have, at the moment it's sort of wine trade day season. And back then, in the late 90s, you'd go to a trade tasting and there'd be 1,000 people in the room. And that was the real way of communicating of wine to the retailers, which I was a retailer. And then you would then verbally communicate with your customers who would come in the shop and talk to you.
Was there less of that kind of taking someone around, like what your distributor here in Melbourne has been doing?
Today we would meet winemakers. They would come with their wholesaler distributors. Probably not as thick and fast as these days.
I'm sure there was a lot less of them, less producers, less distributors.
There was. So you could fill the shop with every producer, but these days, forget it. There's such great diversity these days. So.
Yeah, I mean, small batch winemaking is just. It's never been better in Australia.
Yeah, it's become more and more infinitely complex. The choices today, retailing, which is where I guess I started, was a lot simpler, and you could have intimate knowledge of all of the producers pretty easily.
Sure.
Now I'd imagine it's a lot harder.
Yeah, of course.
So,
but at a certain point, what sort of came first? Was it wanting to make wine, or was it the Barossa?
Definitely not wanting to make wine at that stage. I had this incredible thirst for knowledge for wine as a whole industry.
Yeah,
and I wasn't interested in the problems of the Australian wine industry at that stage. I was just sort of young and keen and full of beans, and I was go.
When you say problems,
like to look at the whole Australian wine industry and think more about let's all move forward together,
right?
And make this a great industry, and Back then, I was just a guy who was interested in talking with people about food and wine and selling wine and doing a good job for my boss and doing a good job for Australian wineries selling their wine and promoting it.
Of course.
So, but that sort of real interest in the intricacies of the Australian wine industry as a whole, this would come later as I worked in other areas of the industry, because I moved away from retail because I felt I'd sort of I was tired. I was getting to the point where I'd done as much as I could.
You'd had your time there, and you kind of wanted to do something else. So
I'd probably done 10 years at one point.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think the monotony got to me.
Sure.
I just noticed my mood was a little different. So I moved on to other things, some wholesaling as well, sort of taking a step back from the coalface.
Sure.
And then at one point, I decided I wanted to be an auctioneer and learn about wine, sort of auctioning wine. And this was right when the internet sales were taking off, and I went and worked for Langton's, and we were pushing into online sales as opposed to live auction.
Online auctions, yeah.
So that was a fantastic time, really interesting time.
Was the idea to sort of just essentially take what a live auction was and kind of find a way of making it into that online experience? I guess it would have been a bit different because they kind of advertise for 2 weeks, and then there's that closing off period.
It was great in 2003, 2004, or 2004 when I started at Langton's. It was groundbreaking stuff. The money and the energy going into building online was incredible. And people were starting to do email campaigns. Well, we were doing them for a few years before at Ultimo, and we were building databases and targeting people and giving people incredible service. And with the online auctions, instead of trying to fill 100 people in the room every month, we were getting half of people who were interested in wine in Australia online at the right time.
Yeah.
And you had 2,000 people buying wine within a 1 week offer.
I remember when I discovered Langton's, and I kind of, I was still on a pretty fixed income, but I'd try and buy whatever I could. I remember that kind of mad rush at, what was it, like 6 p.m. on a Monday?
Yeah.
And just kind of hoping that someone wouldn't outbid me at the last minute.
It was such a rush. Yeah, it was like, for a lot of people, sort of not gambling, but it was
like playing the stock markets.
Addicted. Yeah, it was. You
didn't see that scene in The Wolf of Wall Street, did you? Them going onto online wine auctions and going, yes, we got a good vintage.
Well, there was certainly, I think at one stage there were certainly people who were bidding on the same thing, but on the phone with each other and online at the same time, saying, don't bid, I'm going to buy this. And
wow,
yeah, groups of people getting together, forming syndicates, buying lots of wine. How can we get this wine? Well, we need more people getting together to buy that case, and then we'll split it up. And it was. Because that would have been around about the time that eBay was probably started to hit its real peak. After, yeah. I mean, we were doing before, about 6 months into launching online, the turnover of the business was, it would have been 5-6 times what we were doing with live auction.
Yeah.
And then that continued. The growth was incredible. And just right time, right place, right time. So that was exciting. That was 2 years at Langton's, and Dave Brooks came on board for me about 6 months to go, and I trained Dave Brooks up to do my job.
There you go.
He took over, and I went to the Barossa. That was end of 2005, and that was the moment when I sort of dropped everything and went to learn how to make wine.
That was the idea, was to go and make wine.
I'd been thinking about it for years. I'd had a few sort of
Had you done any vintage at all?
I had, but I, I hadn't formed head wines yet in my head,
Yeah.
and I just knew I wanted to give it a go because, look, it was an incredibly complex reason why I sort of left Sydney and went to the Barossa. If I could distill it quickly, it was part mental health. It was part the fact that I'd been very sick and I'd been in hospital and I had a lot of time to think about wanting to create something. My life was pretty sort of stagnant at that time. I'd had to build up my physical strength, mental strength, and just got to the point where I think I had this manic moment and went, right, I'm chucking in the towel here and I'm going to do what I think I'm supposed to be doing on a bit of a hunch. So yeah, left Langton's on good terms and made sure everyone was happy, and off I went. And
that's good.
Went to, was mates with, had worked with Andrew Gard for a bit, really inspirational guy in the wine industry. Talked with him about the possibility. At that time, he was national sales manager of Torbrick. Talked with him about the possibility of going and working at Torbrick and trying to learn from what I had considered at the time was one of the best groundbreaking wine businesses in the country.
Yeah,
and
let alone in Barossa.
Yeah, they were just so different, and there was this mania with Torbrick, and I'd been following them since my days at Paddington, and
then at Langton's you would have seen kind of prices going up for stuff like Run Rig.
Yeah,
quite like a fever pitch.
Clever. Torbrick, very lucky, launched at the right time, got on board with the right people overseas, and had the right people in Australia too. So that conversation with Andrew Gard led to. I also felt like I owed them something from a conversation I'd had many years before, where I needed some money because I was sick, and the first thing Torbrick and Guardian that said was, "Oh, we'll make it happen. We'll have an auction. We'll raise some money, and we'll pay for that treatment." And then I had that in the back of my mind, and I thought, I want to go and work at Torbrick. So
in some way to repay the favour.
Yeah, and I got there, and then my eyes just opened, and I saw the most incredibly generous place. I felt at peace. I was in the bush, I was in the country.
Even though you're not that far from Adelaide, it does feel so different.
Yeah, and it was kind of magical place, hauntingly beautiful. You could meet generations. You could see the generations of people there and what they'd come from, and the adversity, and you could see the land and what it was giving the people, and I guess I was away from the big smoke and all the crazy problems that were there, and
a real sense of community as well.
Yeah, and I was pretty interested at that point in high-end imported gear. My palate was probably developed through hanging out with people like John Osbeeston from Ultimo at the time, Andrew Kayard at Langton's, Andrew Gard, and I wanted to perhaps make the European wine in the Barossa. And I was young and ambitious and full of ideas, and thought I was gonna make Cote Roti in the Barossa, but and I gave it a crack in those early days. And
had you been to Cote Roti at that point?
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I really, because I was a scientist, I looked at things on the chemistry level,
right?
And I thought, I can do this, I can do this. And I was young and I was full of energy. Anyway, I've definitely calmed down a lot since then.
I was just thinking, I was like, wow, the don't get me wrong, the audacity to sort of think that you could kind of
I was,
So when you say that, do you mean that you wanted to make that style of wine, or do you want to make the equivalent of that wine in the Barossa?
um, I I loved everything about what the Barossa was doing at the time, but I felt that I had something that I could offer, and that I could make a certain style of wine for people that I was drinking wine with,
Sure.
and I didn't really know how I was going to do it or if it was possible, but I just wanted to give it a crack.
Ambition is
Yeah.
sort of a
But
way of putting it.
now I make wine, and you can't take Barossa out of my wines are Barossan, but there's a little bit of a twist in them, and that is I'm always um, they're they're easily identifiable as Barossa wine, but
Yeah, of course.
they're just with a slight finesse and lightness to them.
My sincerest apologies for interrupting this fascinating chat on the Vincast, but I just wanted to quickly talk about another fantastic partner that the podcast has, and that is Wine Companion. Wine Companion, of course, is one of the leading wine publications in Australia. Of course, there is the annual guide from James Halliday, which catalogues, rates wines from around Australia, and identifies the best producers in the country. But Wine Companion is also a magazine where you can read fantastic articles written by some really, really amazing writers about both Australian and overseas wines. And also you'll find some tasting notes and ratings in there as well. And all that information is at the winecompanion.com.au website. Now, as a special deal for subscribers of the Vincast, you can actually get a 30% discount on any subscription package simply by putting in the special code INTREPID30 at purchase, so that they know that you heard about this fantastic deal and the subscriptions via the Vincast. So I hope you will go and support Wine Companion. I appreciate their support of this podcast, and thank you again for listening. So how long did you spend at Torbreck to then kind of think about?
I was I was really at Torbeck for an extended vintage, and that was it really. But I'd worked with. I quickly tried to surround myself with the people that I considered doing some of the best things in the Barossa. So, Marco Cirillo was making some incredible Grenache.
Old vine.
Yeah, Sean Koleski is, he's making some of the best Shiraz in the Barossa, but he's doing it on the quiet, and a barrel tasting with Sean Koleski is one of the best experiences in the Barossa.
They're getting a bit of interest for some of their quirkier wines. Skin Contact White, isn't there some sort of
that's Koleski wines.
Oh, yeah. Different Koleski.
Yeah, different Koleski. Yeah, they're all. Okay. There's a lot of Koleskis.
I'm a bit out of the loop.
Yeah. So I sort of quickly tapped into the community. I was probably still selling a lot of Barossa wine when I was back in Sydney, and helped set up a few people's businesses, pushing them into wholesalers and finding places for people's wines and helping them getting their brands started. Mm-hmm. So, and at that time, I was trying to learn as much as I could about growing wine, making wine. So there was a real barter system happening with me, and the people around me, and I was making just 5-6 barrels here of wine. I was just doing small stuff.
So you were buying fruit from some of these people, and then kind of where were you making the wine?
Lots of different facilities.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah, so Cirillo,
but all just in the Barossa.
Yeah, just in the Barossa. Cirillo Estate, Laughing Jack. I'm at Sharkey at the moment, so my business is still pretty small. It's just me, and I get people to help me actually.
So what were the sort of the early kind of decisions as far as what you wanted to make, where you wanted to get fruit from, how you were going to make it?
Yeah, the first thing was to get access to some good vineyard, and the way the Barossa is set up is there's growers and wineries, and it's a very easy place at the time for me to to start a small wine business. I didn't actually know the first year I arrived at Head Wine. I still didn't know that I was going to create Head Wines. It wasn't until I'd made my first 3 barrels of wine and it worked out that I thought, hey, I've got to do this again. I've got to keep it going. I launched the wine in Sydney. I sold out in 2 days, and I thought, I've got to do something here. This is great. This is working. So, accessing good vineyard and really thinking about soil types, the growers, working with intelligent growers, working with people that I loved hanging out with, because making wine together with people that you don't respect or you don't like is pretty tough gig, So, yeah, found the right people, found the right sites, and dragged those people with me on the journey. So got them involved in all of the processes, and then and within, I'd say, 2 years, I had about 4 vineyards, 4 good solid vineyards, and then really kept talking to wineries and winemakers all over the world, and just kept taking the best bits of advice, and going back to remembering all the numbers and the figures and locking them away in my head and waiting for the right time to utilize them.
So as far as what the process is, do you kind of keep different parcels, different grape varieties separate when you're actually making them, and how do you make a decision about what goes into barrel, and whether you're using barrels?
Winemaking for me, I haven't been classically trained. I didn't go and do any courses, so I just listen and I taste a lot, I drink a lot of wine, and then I just study. And when it comes time to talk to growers and work with people in the vineyard, I just sort of start early in the season and try and remember things so that down the track I can apply the knowledge back to the wines and the outcome of the wines. But winemaking is cooking, essentially. Get good ingredients. It's all timing. Don't poke it too much. Leave it alone, essentially. And hands off. And think about. I tend to think about basics about wine. So oak, fruit, alcohol, acid, tannin. I think about those things the whole time I'm making the wine, and the balance comes, I guess.
How many wines are you making now?
I think it's 10 or 11. So yeah, I've got a disease. I need to sort that out. I've got this sort of fascination with single site, single soil, single variety.
So there's no, you might come to sort of look at a wine and go, I just want that on its own, sort of thing.
Yeah, pretty much. So a lot of producers in the Barossa will focus on one site. Head Wines was always about single vineyard sites. So I buy and work with growers, lease vineyards from all corners of the Barossa, Eden Valley, Barossa Valley.
Okay, so not just the Barossa Valley, but also,
there's 15, 20 kilometres difference between north and south, east and west, and I have a terrible time driving around for the month before we pick at seeing every vineyard, all day.
At least you're not having to drive to the Clare Valley or...
Yes, yeah, get the Barossa right. Stick to the Barossa.
Sure.
So I love talking about and showing the different styles of Shiraz we produce in the Barossa and Grenache, and talking about clones, talking about the structures of the soils.
Vine age.
Vine age, soil age, rock age, aspect,
elevation,
slope, elevation,
all the little intricacies that kind of contribute to the
that's right. That's right. Really, the nitty gritty, And, that sort of 1% rule, I like to work on the 1% and the tiny things that make a difference, and hopefully it adds up to sort of interesting booze.
And how do you sort of make the decision? Because one of the wines that a lot of people talk about, I suppose partly because it's a little bit more accessible, is the Head Red.
Head Red, yeah.
How do you kind of put that together?
So Head Red is I make two Head Reds, Head Red GSM and Head Red Shiraz.
Right,
so
yep.
GSM Southern Rhone, Shiraz Northern Rhone.
Mm-hmm.
They are big blends, essentially. They are blends because the vineyards that go into that wine have amazing fruit quality that comes off them, but perhaps not standalone wine quality. But when you blend them together, you fill in all the gaps.
Yeah.
And you make your complete wine, and the balance happens.
Mm-hmm.
Blending is incredibly important to get that complete wine. And Head Red is, I guess, gained a lot of popularity because obviously the price point, it's entry level,
Mm-hmm.
but and it touches, it's 80% of what I do, and it's at that sort of price point where everyone jumps in on. But what it is there's very little winemaking influence. So it speaks of, from all those corners of the Barossa that I take the fruit from, when you put it together, it speaks of the vintage.
Sure.
And the Barossa.
Sure.
So Head Red GSM is Grenache-based wine, and it always shows the character of that year. It's really interesting to see when you put the blends together. The wine, So, and it's great fun. And then all the other 8 wines that I do are all small batch, single vineyard, and they're wines that look on their own. They've got the qualities, that you can sort of have a complete wine by itself. Doesn't happen very often, but it does happen.
And sort of the other interesting one for me that I kind of discovered a little while ago was the Nouveau.
Yeah, Nouveau was a project I started in 2012, and I was quite aware of Barossa was making this particular style. We're moving away from the Parkerized style. That's been a 15-year journey, but we were still working with the original planted varieties in the Barossa, which were for port production, so Grenache, Shiraz, Mataro. And I wanted to make one wine that wasn't from those varieties, that was red, that didn't use all the oak that we were using, and didn't have the high alcohol that we had, and didn't need the preservative that we were using, and was in a lightweight bottle and used packaging that was recycled. And I just I wanted to.
You want to do something very atypical.
Yeah, and I love drinking Beaujolais. And I decided.
It's probably from hanging out with Gardy.
From who?
Hanging out with Andrew and Gard.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, exactly all those years ago. So, Nouveau. How was I going to make this sort of Beaujolais wine out of the Barossa? Because I probably wanted to show people that Barossa wasn't all about big reds. So I got access to a few young vineyards, Montepulciano, Touriga. At the time, I didn't know they'd blend well together, but they have kind of polar qualities. And I put them together in 2013 from Tank, and hey presto, it was born. So 12% alcohol, light, fresh Sunday lunch wine, and
yeah, definitely.
People would drink a bottle and they could still function, and the job was done. And it's really taken off. It's pretty popular now, which is great. So,
and the most important thing about a vintage is that you've recently had a new member of the family.
Yeah, my little miracle, our little Kelly and I had little Xavier about 7 weeks ago, and a little miracle baby. So he's. I'll try not to say too much because I'll get emotional. He's a little champion.
Mm-hmm. I think it was good that it didn't happen during vintage day because
Yeah.
would have complicated things a lot more.
Yeah, I'd like to say we planned that, but I think we were lucky just to have him. Yeah,
Good fortune.
Yeah,
good fortune.
Yeah. The little angels were helping out. That's
over
good.
time.
Yeah.
Well, look, I really appreciate you making some time in your very hectic
Pleasure.
schedule whilst you're here in Melbourne, and I'm sure everyone that you've been showing the wines to have been thrilled with them. But thank you very much for being on the Vincast.
It's great. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it, James. And hopefully, I can get those wines into your mouth soon.
Fantastic. Yeah. But what's the way that people can kind of get in touch with you? You got the website?
Yeah, so the core of my business is my mailing list, which I started more than 10 years ago, actually.
Right.
So you just jump on the website and you can, I usually offer one twice a year, just the mailing list offer.
And the address is
headwines.com.
And on social media, people can follow you.
Alex Headwine, both on Twitter and
on Instagram.
And if you want to hear about tastings and where to try the wines, you can jump on the Facebook page as well.
Yeah,
which is Headwines, as well.
And it certainly was fantastic to have you on the live stream of the Let's Taste for Grenache.
Yeah, Let's Taste. Yeah, and Grenache, and it's International Grenache Day on Friday. Don't forget. So,
is it? Oh, we'll have to open a bottle of
old vine or ancestor vine,
or something like that. But thank you again, and looking forward to catching up again soon.
Cheers, man.
As always, guys, thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Vincast. I have been James Scaresbrook, otherwise known as the Intrepid Wino, and you can follow myself on social media. On Instagram and Twitter, I am at Intrepid Wino, and the podcast can be found at the Vincast. You can find my Facebook page at facebook.com/Intrepid Wino, and you can find my YouTube channel where I've got all the Let's Taste videos, Intrepid Wino, one word. Please subscribe and watch some of the videos there. You can, of course, subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or the podcast app, Stitcher, Player FM, any number of different podcast hosting platforms. And if you subscribe to the podcast, it means that you can get the latest episode as soon as it becomes available. And if you do subscribe, please take a few minutes just to leave me a rating and review, because it does provide me some great feedback, but also it's a great way to promote the podcast to potential listeners and also potential guests. Of course, all of that information can be found at my website, intrepidwino.com. Not only every episode of the podcast, but all the videos, and also lots of different writings that I've done in the past, so you can find about my journey myself. But I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please let me know at thevincast@gmail.com, and I look forward to the next episode. But until then, bye.